My name is Victor Maddox, and I was 57 years old. The summer my son sent me a text telling me I wasn't welcome at my own grandson's birthday party. Not a phone call. Not a conversation over coffee. A text. 14 words on a Tuesday afternoon while I was lying on my back under a neighbor's kitchen sink, replacing a busted shut-off valve. My phone buzzed against the tile floor beside my elbow. I wiped my hands on a rag, picked it up, and read it right there in the dark under that cabinet. Kendall and I have decided we need some boundaries around family time. Please don't come to Eli's birthday next month. I read it twice, then a third time. The words didn't get any clearer with repetition. I set the phone down, stared at the drain pipe 6 inches from my face, and finished the job. That's what you do when you've spent 3 decades as a union electrician. You don't stop in the middle of the work. But before I take you there, let me tell you something. 31 days after that text, somewhere over the Arizona desert at 34,000 feet, my phone connected to in-flight Wi-Fi and the notifications came in all at once. 19 missed calls, every single one from the same number, the same son who'd told me to stay home. Now let me take you back to where this really started. I raised my son alone. His mother, Ruth, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer when he was 19 and a sophomore at Ohio State. She fought hard and lost fast. 4 months from diagnosis to the afternoon, I drove home from the hospital in silence with her empty overnight bag on the passenger seat. I told him to finish the semester. He wanted to come home, and I told him his mother would want him to finish. So he did, and I worked 3.5 years of overtime until he graduated debt-free. What I didn't tell him was that I'd cashed out part of my 401(a) during the 2008 crash to keep his college fund whole. He never asked where the shortfall went, and I never said. Some things you do because they're right, not because you want the credit for doing them. After I left the union, I ran my own small electrical contracting business out of a pickup truck with rust on the wheel wells and a dent in the passenger door I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. Residential mostly, some commercial. Nothing that would impress anyone at a dinner party. I was good at what I did, and the people in our part of Columbus knew it. When a widow on Maple Street had a wiring problem she couldn't afford to fix, I fixed it. When the youth center's breaker panel caught fire during a summer program, I stayed till midnight rewiring the whole board and never sent a bill. I did these things because they needed doing. I didn't announce them. I'm not built for that. When my grandson Eli was born 9 years ago, I spent 6 weeks in my garage building him a toy chest. Cedar, because cedar smells right and lasts 50 years if you treat it well. Hand-cut dovetail joints at each corner, the way my own father had taught me. I painted his name across the front in dark green letters. I drove it over the day they brought him home from the hospital. My son looked at it for a long moment before he said anything. "That's beautiful, Dad." And I thought then that we were going to be okay, the 3 of us, whatever came next. That was before his wife really got her footing. She came into his life about 5 years ago. She worked in commercial real estate development, the kind of work where you wore good shoes and lunched with city council members, and talked about vision and community impact and portfolio diversity. She was sharp, polished, and she looked at my truck the first time she saw it the way you look at something you're not sure belongs in the driveway. She was never rude. That's what I want you to understand. She was never rude. She was careful about it, the way a skilled contractor is careful. No visible seams, no marks left behind. The first Thanksgiving they were together, she suggested it would be more intimate if they hosted at their place instead of mine. I thought that was reasonable. The year after they married, I got the address by text the morning of the holiday. An hour after she'd confirmed it to everyone else. I assumed it was an oversight. 2 years after that, Eli's 6th birthday came and went before I heard a word about it. My son mentioned the party a week later, almost by accident. He said it was just a small thing, just her side. Her side, as if I were a rival faction. I kept finding reasons to explain it. She was busy. She didn't mean it the way it landed. A man who complains about his daughter-in-law becomes the problem at every family gathering from then on, and I had spent enough years keeping my head down to be good at it by now. So I'd say that's fine, whenever works for you all, and I'd mean it a little less every time, until the words stopped meaning anything at all. The calls from my son thinned out the way winter light thins out. Gradually, until one day you look up and it's dark at 5 in the afternoon and you don't remember exactly when that started happening. Sunday afternoons used to be ours. He'd call while he was driving back from the gym, and we'd talk about nothing in particular for 20 minutes. Then it was every other Sunday, then holidays, then only when something in his house needed a second opinion from someone who knew how electricity worked. I told myself I was giving them space to build their life. What I was actually doing was making it easy for them to forget I was in it. The text about the birthday came on a hot Tuesday in late June. I lay under that kitchen sink, and I read those 14 words, and I knew, the way you know a thing you've been refusing to know for a long time, that this wasn't about boundaries. Boundaries you discuss. Boundaries you explain over a cup of coffee at the kitchen table. What you don't do is send 14 words to a grandfather and call it a conversation. I typed back, "Can we talk?" 3 dots appeared immediately. Something foolish and hopeful happened in my chest, the way a dog's ears lift at a familiar sound before the brain catches up. The dots pulsed, then they vanished. Nothing came. I put the phone in my shirt pocket and drove home. There is one thing you need to understand about Eli before any of the rest of this makes sense. He was the kind of kid who picked up every interesting rock he found and kept them lined up on his windowsill. He called it his collection, even though they were just rocks from the backyard and the school playground and the creek behind the park. He once called me on a Saturday morning, very seriously, to report that he'd found a piece of quartz the size of his fist, and did I think it might be worth something. I told him it was worth whatever he decided it was worth. He thought about that for a while and said, "I think it's worth keeping." That was the kind of kid he was. Last spring, before things reached the point they reached, I'd promised him something. We were going to build a birdhouse together, a real one, not a kit, the kind with a copper roof and a hand-drilled entrance hole, and a perch sanded smooth so no bird would get a splinter coming or going. I'd sketched up a rough plan on the back of a hardware store receipt. He kept that receipt in his school backpack for 3 months. "You promise, Grandpa?" "Yeah, bud, I promise." Then the visits started getting shorter, and then they stopped without anyone announcing they'd stopped. By June, I was driving past his neighborhood to drop off a birthday card, since I wasn't invited to the party itself. That's when I saw it. Eli's toy chest, the cedar one I'd built the week he came home from the hospital. Sitting at the curb 2 streets over from my son's house, propped against a fire hydrant, a handwritten sign taped to the front that said "Free, 9 years old, hand-cut dovetails." His name still painted in dark green across the front, faded now but legible. I sat in my truck with the engine running and looked at it for a long time. Then I drove home. I know how these things happen. I can trace every step backward and show you exactly where the path went. What I still don't fully understand is how you watch it happening and keep choosing to say nothing. You let it go once because you don't want to be the difficult one. Then again for the same reason, and then again, and somewhere in the middle of all those reasonable silences, a toy chest you built with your own hands ends up on a curb with a free sign on it. I tried one more time. I called my son on a Friday evening and asked if we could meet for lunch, just the 2 of us. Half an hour. The phone rang 4 times and then his wife picked up. "Hey Victor," warm as a waiting room, impersonal in the same way. "Jason's tied up right now. Everything okay?" I said I'd like to speak with my son for a few minutes. "Of course. I'll have him call you back." A pause that felt measured. "We've just been really intentional about protecting our family rhythm lately. You know how it is." I said I understood. He never called back. That night I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee I didn't drink, and thought about what protecting our family rhythm means when applied to a man who wired his son's first apartment for free and once drove 2 hours in a February ice storm because that son had locked himself out of his car. I thought about a toy chest on a curb. I thought about Eli and his windowsill rocks, and that was the thought I couldn't set aside. 2 days later, a letter arrived. Real paper, real envelope, handwritten address. The kind of mail you almost don't recognize anymore because nobody sends it. It was from the local IBEW chapter, Local 683, the electricians union I'd belonged to for 22 years before I went out on my own. They were opening a new apprenticeship training center that fall. They wanted to name the main workshop after me. 30 years of mentoring apprentices, the letter said, and a small fund I'd set up quietly 11 years ago that had put 41 young electricians through their journeyman licensing exams. I stood at the mailbox reading it in the heat. 41. I'd stopped counting somewhere around 25. I called the chapter president to decline. I had a flight the following week. My brother Carl had been asking me for 2 years to come out to Scottsdale, and I'd finally booked it, mostly to get out of my own head after the birthday text. I explained all this. The chapter president listened without interrupting. Then he said, "Victor, the dedication ceremony is the Thursday before your flight, and these apprentices asked for you by name. Half of them are bringing their families. You'd be robbing them of the chance to say thank you to your face, and I'm not going to let you do that." I told him I'd think about it. That evening, Eli called me. He'd found his mother's old tablet in a drawer somewhere, and figured out how to reach my number on it. His face appeared too close on the screen the way kids always hold a camera. "Grandpa, how come you didn't come to my birthday?" I chose my words, the way you choose your footing, crossing a dark room. "I had some things come up, bud. I'm sorry I missed it. Mom said you were probably really busy." Something like that. He looked off screen for a moment, then back, and when he spoke again, he'd lowered his voice like he was sharing classified information. "Grandpa, I heard Mom and Dad talking in the kitchen. Dad said you were being difficult." He frowned. "What does difficult mean?" My jaw went tight. "It means different things to different people." "Are you mad at me?" "Not at you, not even a little bit." He was quiet. "Then what about the birdhouse?" "Still happening," I said, without hesitation. "I've already got the copper sheeting, you and me this fall." "You pinky promised." "I know I did." Dad says. He stopped short. Somewhere behind him a door opened and I heard his mother's voice even as always, asking who he was talking to. His eyes went wide. "I gotta go." The screen went black. I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time after that, thinking about a 9-year-old who'd heard his father call his grandfather difficult, thinking about what gets planted in a child when nobody's paying attention to what they're planting. The Thursday ceremony I almost skipped. I had every reason laid out, and they were all true and they were all small. The chapter president called again that morning. "I am not above begging," he said. "Consider yourself formally begged." I went. The new training center smelled like fresh drywall and new lumber. They'd set up chairs in the main workshop and strung lights along the overhead conduit runs, which made a working electrician smile quietly to himself. 150 people, maybe more, and I knew half of them. Some I'd last seen when they were 22 years old and nervous about their first panel installation. One of them stood and told the room that without the fund I'd set up, he'd have had to put his apprenticeship on hold for 2 full years. He was running his own crew now. 12 men, commercial work, a contract with the school district. He'd started his own small scholarship for incoming apprentices. He pointed at me when he said it. Then another stood. Then a woman near the back who held up her phone to show a photo of her son, just passed his master electrician exam. One by one, people stood, and I sat with my hands folded and my ears burning hot and wished very much that I was under someone's kitchen sink fixing something with a straightforward solution. Afterward, at the coffee table in the back, a man in a charcoal blazer introduced himself. Fletcher Dunn. He sat on a city council subcommittee reviewing bids for a new mixed-use development on the east side of Columbus. He told me my name was familiar because he'd seen it on community grant paperwork going back years. Then he said something else. One of the firms bidding for the East Side project, Dunmore Property Group. Their development director presented to us 2 weeks ago. He paused in the deliberate way of a man who has decided to say a thing. Her name is Kendall Maddox. When the subject of community ties came up during the Q&A, she said her household had always been more private than publicly involved. He let that sit there between us. "I didn't know who her father-in-law was until tonight," he said. "I find that's a fairly significant omission, given that her father-in-law has 41 apprentices and a workshop with his name on it." I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything that needed saying. He shook my hand and moved back into the crowd. I stood there with a paper coffee cup going cold in my hand. For 5 years she had managed the story, kept me carefully out of the frame, too rough-edged, too truck and work boots for the image she was building. She had done it patiently and thoroughly, and she had never once considered that her frames don't hold when the subject keeps existing in the world without her permission. The next morning I drove to the airport. Before I left, I sent my son one message. I kept it plain. "I love you, and I'll always love Eli. I'm not going to keep knocking on a door that stays closed. I'm going to see Uncle Carl for a while. Take care of yourself." I didn't mention the ceremony. I didn't mention the toy chest. Neither was a weapon, and I wouldn't use them as one. I turned my phone to silent somewhere over Indiana. Over Kansas, I turned it all the way off, black screen, nothing coming in. I hadn't done that in years. I wanted the quiet. I wanted 34,000 feet of it. Carl met me at the Phoenix airport, louder and taller than I remembered, which is what brothers look like when you haven't seen them in 2 years. He had a back patio that got full morning sun and shade all afternoon and cold beer in the fridge, and a neighbor's dog that came over the fence to sit with us uninvited. We didn't talk about my son that first evening. We talked about Carl's bad knee and a fishing trip we'd taken in 2003 that went completely wrong, in a way that was funny now, and what we were going to cook for breakfast. It was the first night in months I slept without waking up, at 3 in the morning, turning things over. I turned my phone back on the next morning over coffee. The notifications took almost a full minute to populate. 19 missed calls, all from my son's number, text messages from his number and from his work email, 1 voicemail. I played the voicemail with the phone pressed to my ear. His voice was not the measured, careful voice he'd been using with me for 2 years. It sounded like him the way he sounded at 19 when something was wrong, and he didn't know how to handle it alone. "Dad, call me. Please just call me back." I set my coffee down and called. He answered before it finished the first ring. "Dad," the exhale was audible. "Where have you been?" "Arizona," I said, like I told you. And then it came out. Not organized, not rehearsed, the way things come out when they've been held too long. He'd seen something the night before. The IBEBU chapter had posted about the dedication ceremony, photos and write-up, 41 apprentices, the fund, my name on the wall. A local news outlet had picked it up by morning. Someone had tagged the post to our neighborhood group. His wife had seen it first. "She came to me at 9 o'clock at night with her laptop," he said, "and she showed me the article, and there was your picture, and Dad, I didn't know. I didn't know about the fund. I didn't know about any of it." "You never asked," I said, not harshly, just as a fact. A long silence. "No," he said, "I didn't." Another silence. "The text I sent you, about Eli's birthday. She drafted it. She handed me the phone and said it was better coming from me, and I sent it. I've been letting her handle things like that for years because I told myself she was better at communication than I was, and I didn't want conflict, and He stopped himself. "I found the toy chest, Dad. I went looking for it in the garage this week, and she said she'd given it away. She said it was taking up space." I looked at my brother's cactus garden through the kitchen window and breathed steadily. "Victor, I know." He caught himself using my first name, which he almost never did. "Dad, Eli asks about you. He asks why you don't come around, and we've been telling him you're busy. He's 9 years old, and we've been lying to him about his grandfather." "I know," I said. "How long have you known what was happening?" "Long enough that I should have said something sooner." Silence. "Fletcher Dunn called Kendall's firm that same morning," he said. "The city subcommittee. He said they needed to revisit the presentation timing. In her business, that means the bid is dead." A pause. "She told me about it when I confronted her. And then everything just... I'd been explaining it to myself for years, every time something didn't feel right. And then I looked at that article and I looked at that empty space in the garage where your chest used to be, and I thought about Eli getting older and learning that this is what you do to the people who love you. And I couldn't." His voice broke on the last part. "I asked her to leave. Last night. She's staying with her sister. I hadn't expected that. I want to be honest. I had not expected that. I'm sorry too," I told him. "I should have said something years ago. I told myself I was keeping the peace." We both did. "Yeah." I looked at the flat, bright Arizona light coming through the window. We both did. We stayed on the line a moment without speaking, and it was a different kind of quiet than the one that had been between us for 2 years. That had been the silence of unsaid things. This was the silence after. "Is there someone who wants to talk to me?" I asked. I heard him smile. The phone changed hands. "Grandpa." Every tight thing in my chest went loose at once. "Hey, buddy. Are you really in Arizona?" "Really. Cacti everywhere. You would love it." He laughed, full, unguarded, the laugh that hasn't yet learned to be careful. Then it went quiet the way it does when something important is coming. "Grandpa, the birdhouse." "You and me," I said. "This fall. I've already got the copper sheeting in the truck." You brought the plans? In my jacket pocket, carried them out here and back. A pause, then quietly, I kept my rocks, my collection. Even when Mom said I should clear them off the sill to make room, I kept every single one. I had to breathe through that one. Good, I said, because this fall we're going to find you more. Promise? Pinky promise, and you know I keep those. I know, he said, you always do. Carl drove me to a man-made lake the next morning that didn't have much in it, and we cooked what little we caught over a camp stove on the bank. He asked me once, on the second evening, how I was doing with all of it. I told him I thought I was going to be okay. He nodded like he'd suspected as much. I flew home on a clear October morning. The drive from the airport took me past my son's neighborhood, and I saw his truck in the driveway and the light on in the garage, so I pulled over. He came out when he heard me. We stood in the driveway not saying anything clever for a moment. Then I reached into the bed of my truck and lifted out the copper sheeting, still rolled in craft paper, that had flown to Arizona and back. He looked at it. For the birdhouse, I said. He shook his head slightly, the way a person does when they're taking something in, rather than disagreeing with it. We went inside. Eli was at the kitchen table doing homework. He looked up. For a second, his whole face just opened up, the way a kid's face does when the thing they stopped expecting actually walks through the door. He climbed down from his chair and crossed the kitchen and put his arms around my waist and held on. I put my hand on the back of his head. That was enough. That was more than enough. The birdhouse took us 3 weekends in my garage with the radio on low and Eli asking questions from the first day to the last. Why this wood? Why that angle? Why do you measure twice? Because wood doesn't forgive, I told him, unlike people. Wood doesn't give you a second chance to get it level. He thought about that for a while without saying anything. Then, people give second chances sometimes though, right? Yeah, I said, if you've earned it. He nodded like he was filing that away, and went back to sanding. We hung the finished birdhouse on the big oak at the far edge of my backyard. On a Saturday in late October, the light going amber and the air carrying that first real bite of fall. Eli climbed the stepladder and hammered the hook in himself while I steadied the base. When it was done, he stepped back and stood beside me, and we both looked at it. That's a good one, he said. Yeah, I said, that's a good one. He reached into his jacket pocket and brought out a piece of dark red stone, rounded and smooth, about the size of a quarter. He held it out to me without saying anything. I turned it over, let the last of the afternoon light catch the grain of it. For your collection, I said. For yours, he said, so you have one too. I closed my hand around it and kept it closed. My son called me that evening after Eli had gone in to wash up for dinner. We talked a while about nothing much. The weather, a garbage disposal I'd come look at the following week, a school project Eli had going that involved building a small model bridge. And then near the end, quiet for a second, he said, I'm glad you didn't walk away from us for good, Dad. I thought about that, about all the places where walking away would have been the easier, quieter choice. About 14 words under a kitchen sink, about a toy chest with a name painted on it sitting at a curb. A father doesn't walk away from his kid, I said, not the way I was raised. I want to raise Eli that way. Then you're already further along than you think. A week later, I got a text from a number I hadn't saved. 3 sentences, no preamble. I know I don't deserve a response. I was wrong about a lot of things, including you. I'm sorry, Victor. His wife, I read it twice. I didn't reply that night, but I kept it. Here is what I understand now that I didn't understand a year ago. Silence is not the same as dignity. I spent a long time telling myself they were the same thing, that swallowing it, adjusting, making room for everyone else was a kind of grace or strength. It wasn't either of those things. It was just easier. There is a difference between being easy to be around and being easy to erase, and I crossed that line so gradually I didn't feel myself crossing it. What changed wasn't that I fought back. I didn't fight back. I didn't plan any of it. I didn't make a single call with the intention of making anything harder for anyone. All I did was show up in a room full of people who wanted to say thank you, and let them. Then I flew to see my brother and turned my phone off. The truth doesn't need your help. It just needs space to get into the same room as the lie. After that, it does its own work every time. Eli sends me pictures now whenever he finds an interesting rock. I've started a windowsill of my own in my garage, next to the workbench, stones lined up the way his are lined up on his sill at home. Last week he sent me a photo of a piece of quartz he'd found near the creek behind his school, shot close up on his little phone, the way a kid photographs something important. Worth keeping? I sent back. 3 seconds then. Worth everything. I set my phone down on the workbench, looked at the row of stones, and laughed. A real one, the kind that doesn't need an audience. Outside, the cedar birdhouse was swaying just slightly in the wind, and for the first time in longer than I could honestly say, I felt like a man who was exactly where he was supposed to be.